I just find the Epstein Files so fascinating because all the people who are now in charge of the government under Donald Trump, particularly Kash Patel and Dan Bongino at the FBI, but others as well throughout the government, were, over the last 4 years, everywhere in the media, on their shows, on every other show, banging on the table, demanding the immediate release of all the Epstein Files. We're now 5 months into the Trump administration. We haven't gotten a single document that wasn't previously published of the Epstein Files. They made a humiliating showing of pretending to release it when they called those conservative influence, and they all waved around the binder, Epstein Files. We're like, oh my God, what was in them? And then it turns out like nothing. You know, just every document that was in this binder was already previously released as part of the litigation or journalism that was done. And the Pam Bondi's new excuse, because I mean, I'm glad that there are a lot of people in the Trump movement and the MAGA movement who are not contrary to how they're depicted in some sort of cult. Like they hold these people accountable. Like they want to understand, like, we were promised these things. Like, why isn't this happening? And so Pam Bondi's excuse now is we have thousands and thousands of sex videos of Jeffrey Epstein having sex with minors, implying that it's obviously going to take a lot of time to go through these videos, and therefore we have to be patient before we get them. And it's like, I don't care about sex videos of Jeffrey Epstein having sex with children, because we already know that Jeffrey Epstein had sex with children. That's kind of the reason we know who he is. He's been twice charged with that, once convicted, and then was ready to be charged again. For me, the two biggest issues are there people to whom he trafficked minors because he was charged with sex trafficking, but nobody has been charged with being the recipient of that sex trafficking. But the much more interesting question for me is, and there's a lot of reason to believe it's true, is, was he working with or for any foreign intelligence agencies? There is no way they don't already have that answer. Maybe the answer is no. Maybe he wasn't working with any. It would shock me, but maybe that's their answer. Maybe their answer is he was. Why don't we have those answers? Like, have FBI agents, for whatever reason, go through those sex tapes for the next 3 years. That's fine. What stops them from releasing that question? That answer now.
For people who may not be as familiar with the details, what leads you to raise that question? Is there evidence that suggests he might have been working with the foreign intel agency?
Well, first of all, the source of his wealth has always been mysterious. I mean, he wasn't just very rich. He was living the life of a multi-billionaire. He had, $50 million properties in Manhattan and West Palm Beach and
New Mexico.
Bought that island, New Mexico, flying around on a 747. This is not just like somebody who's very wealthy. This is somebody with essentially unlimited resources, right? Like Bill Gates type wealth. And his primary benefactors is Les Wexner, who is a multi-billionaire, somebody with whom he worked closely. And I guess the argument or the claim is, he was a brilliant strategist for how to save taxes, how to save money on taxes.
He was like a highly competent accountant, basically.
Yeah, like a tax accountant. Yeah, that's what tax accountants do. They tell you how, what strategies to use to save money. So maybe Les Wexner valued him so much that he gave him, I don't know, $3 billion. In general, billionaires don't like to give money away that they don't have to. Maybe Les Wexner is like super generous. Like, oh, I'm so grateful to Jeffrey Epstein. Here's like $2 billion. But Les Wexner has all sorts of ties to, like, his main non-money making endeavor in life is supporting Israel and donating to pro-Israel groups and working closely with the Israeli government. Ghislaine Maxwell, who's now in prison as having been essentially his right-hand man, her father, Robert Maxwell, who died in a very mysterious way, he slipped off his yacht, was a known Mossad agent. He worked with the Mossad. He had very close ties to Israel. We all know
he was given a state funeral.
Yes, in Israel.
Yes.
And, when I did the Snowden reporting, there's a lot of documents that we released that, and just because there were so many, they're not all of them got the attention they deserved. One of the set of files we released described the intelligence relationship that we have with Israel, that the NSA has with Israel. Israel is the number one recipient of NSA technology and NSA intelligence. We share more with Israel, even more than we do with the Five Eyes partners who develop this technology. We give more to Israel, more intelligence, raw intelligence about Americans as well, and more intelligence know-how. But at the same time, the documents that describe who are our greatest intelligence threats, who are our greatest intelligence adversaries, who spies on us the most, who is capable of spying out the most, number one on the list is Israel as well. Obviously, the Israelis use, the most dangerous spying programs like Pegasus and others come from Israel, are developed by Israel, are controlled by the Israelis, by which I simply mean to say that Israel uses every weapon at its disposal, including gathering incriminating information about its enemies. Some people have suggested that, oh no, it's not Israel, it's probably the Qatari intelligence agencies with whom he worked. Maybe it was Peru. Maybe it was like Indonesia.
Well, people have said that Epstein was working with the Qataris?
Yeah. That I
want to keep a list of people who make that claim. Do you know anyone?
It's kind of
funny.
You know how like Israel, like supporters of loyalists of Israel in the United States are now constantly trying to convince people that the real foreign government that is exerting extreme amounts of influence over our politicians and our institutions is Qatar.
I find it hilarious.
And I'm always like, you know what? Let me know when Congress starts passing on a weekly basis pro-Qatar resolutions, or when like students are being expelled and deported because they've criticized Qatar. Let me know when we start sending billions of dollars a year to Qatar. Let me know when all that starts to happen, and I'll be receptive to the fact that maybe Qatar. But anyway, all I'm saying, I'm not saying it's Israel. I'm just saying the nature of what Jeffrey Epstein was doing, the amount of wealth that it required, the number of the most powerful elites on the planet who were with him, who were involved with him, who were at his island too, despite knowing that he had been convicted in 2010 of having sex with minors, hiring prostitutes who were underage, who continued to consort with him in the most, proximate ways. Something was going on there. It would be incredibly valuable. He kept, he had cameras in every part of his house. He had tapes of everything. Obviously, that would be of immense value to any foreign intelligence agent
and American. I mean, he was close friends with Bill Burns,
right?
Maybe head of the CIA.
Maybe domestic intelligence agencies as well. But it really is starting to inflame my suspicions a great deal every day that goes by when we're not getting that information, particularly because the people who have it are the people who spent years demanding its release and promising to facilitate it if they got into power. How is this not talked about every day? Okay, so in Florida, in the United States generally, having sex with minors, hiring, using minors as prostitutes is considered like a pretty terrible crime. Jeffrey Epstein barely went to jail for that. They gave him a plea deal where he spent like 6 seconds in jail and then like most of the time at home doing community service. And Alex Acosta, who was the U.S. attorney for the Southern District of Florida at the time, which was in charge of the case, that's where Epstein was, ultimately ended up in the Justice Department and other roles inside the government. And so he was constantly asked, why would you give Jeffrey Epstein such a generous plea deal that nobody would ever get for those crimes? And he ended up saying, I was told that he's intelligence and therefore leave him alone. That's what Alex Acosta, the prosecutor, says that he was told about what he should do with the Jeffrey, leave him alone. So why don't we know what that means? That's what, what would be the reason that people inside the Trump administration who have long expressed vehemently, vocally, at the top of their agenda, demands that the Epstein Files be released, why are they not telling us that information?
This is a person who I confirmed is a real person. I didn't believe it at first. Congressman Randy Fine of Florida. And he said this the other day on Fox News last week, quote, in World War II, we did not negotiate a surrender with the Nazis. We did not negotiate a surrender with the Japanese. We nuked the Japanese twice in order to get unconditional surrender. That needs to be the same here in Gaza. There is something deeply wrong with this culture and it needs to be defeated. I don't even know what to say to that, but that, first of all, it's evil, but how can you say something like that and not get expelled from Congress or the Republican? How can that person be a member of the Republican Party?
Randy Fine is such an important, despite how repulsive he is ethically, morally, and physically, despite that, I think he's a very important instrument for looking at this radical contradiction within the Republican Party and especially the America First movement. So Donald Trump obviously there were a lot of Republicans who wanted to run for that Mike Waltz seat and for the Matt Gaetz seat, and whoever Trump endorses is essentially guaranteed to be the winner. And he endorsed Randy Fine and said Randy Fine is all America first. And I remember the day that happened thinking Randy Fine actually is not even concerned about America, let alone placing it first. His entire political existence is driven by loyalty to a foreign country. Everything for him is Israel. Everything. And to like, even to an extent that is very severe, for a Congress that in general prioritizes Israel to a shocking amount. I can't think of a foreign country that is as important as Israel is to the United States that has any other kind of foreign country placing its interest on par with, if not above it. And so here you have a member of the Republican Party who identifies as America first, who Donald Trump endorsed as a member of America first, and whose loyalty is to a foreign country, who wants to have the American worker fund that foreign country, wants the American worker to pay for their military, give $4 billion automatically every year in a deal negotiated by Obama and Netanyahu when Obama was on his way out. And every time Israel wants to have a new war, we send them whatever they want, billions more. We feed them all these weapons paid for by the American taxpayer. We isolate ourselves from the rest of the world. We block every UN resolution that the entire world supports in order to tie ourselves to Israel. We lose our own standing, our own soft power, our own imagery in the world. We lose massive amounts of money. All sorts of people have said that the reason there's so much anti-American hatred in the Middle East, the reason why people want to attack our country, the reason why we can't get things done in the Middle East, a region where we have a lot of interest, is because of the hatred for the United States, driven primarily by our standing behind and doing everything for Israel.
Osama Bin Laden said that in his manifesto. He spelled it out.
In 2022 and 2023, there were a bunch of MAGA people who were opposed to the funding of the war in Ukraine. And some non-MAGA people too, like RFK Jr. And I was obviously very opposed to it from the start. You were too. I went on the show many times to talk about that. And I had a bunch of them on, like Matt Gaetz and Marjorie Taylor Greene and RFK Jr., a lot of them. And I always had this same plan. I would ask them, like, why are you opposed to having the U.S. fund the war in Ukraine? Like, don't you want the U.S. to stand up for Ukraine against Russia? And they would all say, this isn't our business. This is on the other side of the world. It doesn't affect my constituents. Our communities are falling apart. We have fentanyl addiction sweeping our communities. Nobody has jobs. Nobody has healthcare. Our country is falling apart. We don't have the money to keep sending to foreign countries. And it's outrageous that we keep doing it. And they would be very passionate and very adamant. I would encourage them to keep developing that idea. And they would say all those things with which I completely agreed. And then my next question was always, do you apply the same rationale to the United States funding the Israeli military and Israeli society and Israeli wars? And they would all stutter to try and distinguish why it was that they had one view for Ukraine and a very compelling rationale, but then had to say, oh no, Israel is different, to the point that RFK Jr., and I actually really appreciated this about him, when I kept pressing him about it, I said, you're saying we don't have money to fund foreign wars, that our country is falling apart. Why are we sending billions of dollars to Israel when Israelis have a higher standard of living than millions of American workers, than millions of American citizens? Why is the American worker forced to subsidize Israel? You said we can't be doing that. We can't afford it when you came to Ukraine. Why isn't the same applicable to Israel? And he then finally said, you know what? I'm going to think about that. Maybe it is time for Israel to stand on its own. I was like, oh, you think? So this is the utterly irreconcilable contradiction at the heart of the America First movement, which is America First means we use our resources for ourselves. We build our military to defend our borders, to defend the American people. We use our resources to improve their lives materially, to build better roads and better schools and better communities, to offer them addiction services and whatever else they need, healthcare access. And we do not anymore use it for this globalist agenda of going around the world, giving it to other countries and funding other countries. That is the America First philosophy, as Trump has articulated it, and many people have articulated it for years, and the foreign policy of America First as well. Excellent. And then on the other hand, those same people, many, are adamant that we have to fund Israel. We have to fund its military. We have to fund its wars. We have to subsidize society. We have to sacrifice our own interests to protect theirs. We have to put the lives of our service members in risk, have American citizens die in order to protect Israel and the wars that it starts with its neighbors. And there is no reconciling this. There is no way to take an America First ideology and make it consistent with this constant prioritization of Israeli interests, let alone what is now happening, which is the aggressive erosion of our free speech rights and core civil liberties guaranteed to us by the Constitution, not to protect our own government from criticism, but to protect this foreign country from criticism. And I do think there are people now starting finally to understand that these two things cannot be maintained simultaneously.
Well, it's going to blow up the Trump movement, I think. I don't think it needs to. I think there's a, you could pivot, but I agree just conceptually that those are irreconcilable goals.
All sorts of people have said that the reason there's so much anti-American hatred in the Middle East, the reason why people want to attack our country, the reason why we can't get things done in the Middle East, a region where we have a lot of interest, is because of the hatred for the United States, driven primarily by our standing behind and doing everything for Israel.
Osama Bin Laden said that in his manifesto. He spelled it out.
Can we just talk 1 second about the fact that Bin Laden wrote a note to the American people explaining why Al-Qaeda was driven to attack the United States. And there were some religious references, obviously, because Al-Qaeda is a nominally religious organization. But overwhelmingly, he listed very specific grievances with American foreign policy, all having to do with the fact that we constantly interfere in that region. We place military bases on sacred Saudi soil. We imposed a sanctions regime on Iraq for years that killed 500,000 Iraqi children that Madeleine Albright said was worth it. We overthrow their leaders and impose the ones that we want that then serve the interests of the United States and Israel. And we fund and arm Israel to repress and kill Palestinians. And he said that it's not that you're some country that's just sitting there peacefully and that never bothers us. And we decided, hey, look over there. They let their women wear bikinis, so we better go and attack them, right? Like we were attacked for our freedom. So he writes this letter. I remember the letter at the time. He was interviewed by Al Jazeera and previously by The New Yorker. So we got to hear from Osama bin Laden. Although right after 9/11, the U.S. government told media outlets, do not broadcast any speeches or interviews with Osama bin Laden. And their reasoning was, we're concerned that he may have embedded within his speech some sort of secret code that will activate sleeper cells inside the United States. Like he was going to blink Morse code or like have secret phrases, and then people inside the United States would hear it. So they told ABC, CBS, NBC, Fox, CNN, do not air any interviews with bin Laden, when of course it was because they didn't want Americans to hear from bin Laden why there was so much anti-American sentiment. It was because of our interference in the Middle East in general and our support for Israel in particular. They were selling this lie that it was because we're free and they hate our freedom. There are a lot of countries that are free. Like Brazil, women walk around in bikinis. They have elections. Al-Qaeda has never attacked Brazil or Japan or South Korea or Norway. And bin Laden was explaining why there's so many Muslims in that region who hate the United States, but the United States government didn't want anyone to hear it. 20 years later, while October 7th happened and we're supporting this ethnic cleansing, and I would call it now a genocide as well, in Gaza, that's what most genocidal experts, including Israelis and Jewish ones, call it. It's hard to say anything else, but whatever. In the middle of all that, a bunch of young people who were told the history of 9/11 that the U.S. government wanted everyone to believe, discovered the bin Laden letter because it was on the Guardian's website. Because the Guardian's a British newspaper. It was not no American news outlet, despite its historical importance. And they started passing it around on TikTok and saying, oh, wow, I never knew any of this. I never understood that one of the reasons why these people attacked us was because we are so monomaniacally devoted to Israel, and why that we're constantly interfering in that region, bombing them, sanctions, overthrowing their government, overthrowing their leaders. Of course, people are going to get angry at us and want to attack back. And the minute that letter started to become well read by the American people who were, primarily younger, the US government went ballistic and demanded that TikTok ban it. The Guardian, a news outlet, immediately took the letter off their website so nobody could read it any longer. All those links that people were posting on TikTok to go read that letter would no longer work. And then TikTok immediately, under pressure from the US government, which was obviously already threatening to close TikTok and ban it from the United States anyway, started banning all the hashtags, Bin Laden letter. You could not anymore read or find. I mean, this is like the stuff we're taught that the Soviets did, right? Like hiding letters, hiding documents, erasing history. And I continued to be shocked by that event, that everybody thought that was fine. To take a letter that is of great historical importance,
yes,
from the person that is alleged to have been responsible for the single worst attack on American soil, maybe on par with Pearl Harbor, but in terms of like a single day casualty count, explaining from his perspective why he did it. Like, you want to hear from your enemy, right? Like, you want to understand like what they're claiming.
I want all relevant information, and I'll decide.
Yeah. You don't want people deciding for you what you can and can't read.
Yeah.
They were petrified that young Americans were going to hear the reasons proffered, and they made that letter disappear. The proof in the pudding is going to be what happens with Iran. I woke up today, I'm here, and I saw the New York Times, and the lead story on the front page of the New York Times is Israel may attack Iran despite Trump's desire to reach a deal. And it's like, how can that even be possible? What do you mean Israel might attack Iran despite Trump's desire to reach a deal? Their weapons came from the United States. We pay for the operation of those weapons. They can't attack Iran without some kind of military and logistical support from the United States. And who is Israel that depends on the United States, that is a vassal state of the United States, supposedly, to say, we don't care what the president of the United States wants in his foreign policy. We're going to subvert it and undermine it and blow it up and destroy it if we want to.
That's not the behavior of an ally. I think the idea that we're getting a lot out of this, our interests are being served, is clearly not true.
It's the opposite.
Well, the Israeli government has had a close relationship with the Chinese Communist government for over 40 years. And there have been a lot of transfers of military technology from Israel to China, including transfers of American military technology to China. It's a fact. People lie about it, and it's not true. Well, it is true, actually. And I don't think that's widely known. I mean, the Chinese help operate the port of Haifa, one of the most beautiful ports in the world. Wonderful place. But yeah, they're in the port of Haifa. So how is it that the main recipient of American support, both financial and moral and legal, and all the things that we have done for our closest ally, how is it that that country is materially supporting our main global adversary, a country really described by the Trump administration as an enemy? Okay, that's their posture toward, China's an enemy. And our military technology is going to Israel and then winding up in China? That's a fact? Like, how? I don't think most people know that. And I don't know even if people in the administration know that. I mean, some do. How can that?
There's this fascinating history, but because it's 30 years ago, a lot of people didn't live through it. People who forgot about it. It's been whitewashed. But the last two presidents that tried to exert independence with respect to Israel, and that told Israel, you cannot do this if you want to continue to receive our largesse, were Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. Ronald Reagan called the Israeli bombing of Lebanon a Holocaust.
I know.
And picked up the phone and ordered them to stop, and they did, and then withdrew the military barracks.
1982.
Exactly. George H.W. Bush.
And then our Marine barracks were bombed a year later.
Right. But then he didn't go to war as they were demanding he did with Iran, whoever. He said, why are we even there? But
how did our American whatever, without getting into this, but did anyone know that the bombing was coming? Is it possible that intel about that bombing was withheld from the United States?
I mean, the Israelis
yes,
do have a lot of their neighbors under extremely heavy surveillance, as you imagine they would. But the other interesting thing was, in the George H.W. Bush administration, which was run by these kind of realists, like that of the kind, that they didn't call it Self America First, but the idea was, we do foreign policy not for benevolence to other countries. We don't rebuild other countries. We prioritize American interests, people like James Baker and Brent Scowcroft, who were the key foreign policy figures in the Bush 41 administration. He was in the CIA, had a very similar foreign policy. And their argument was what American presidents have always said, which is that one of the worst threats to American national interests in the Middle East is the ongoing Palestinian-Israeli conflict. And the expansion of Israeli settlements in the West Bank was a direct threat to American interests. And James Baker said, as part of the State Department policy, if you continue to expand West Bank settlements, which prevent an Israeli-Palestinian two-state solution that harm our interests, we're going to cease giving you the loan guarantees that you desperately need. Why are we going to give you loan guarantees if you're directly harming what we keep telling you are our interests? And what happened was there was this massive smear campaign. You can go read it in any newspaper.
I remember
it was led by Bill Clinton, who was preparing to run against George H.W. Bush, calling the Bush administration anti-Semites, suggesting that they were inflaming anti-Semitism by disagreeing with Israel in public. And since then, there has been no president. James Baker, I mean, this is like one of the most respected, foreign policy operatives in the world. And I hated James Baker for a lot of what he believed at the time. I would have to probably go back and revise some of that and think about why.
Yeah, I mean, if only we had that now.
But there was like zero evidence that he harbored any animosity.
Well, there's also evidence that there are plans to commit violence against George H.W. Bush, the president, actually. That's been incredibly alleged. So whatever. No, of course, what you're saying is absolutely right. And no one wants to deal with being slandered. And it is slander. It's not true. It's unfair. It's actually pretty over the top.
And the irony of it, Tucker, is
you're transferring American military technology to China. If they're operating, at least in part, the port of Haifa, we're supporting you. You have to explain that right away, or else we're going to stop all aid. Because why would we want to be helping the transfer of American military technology to China?
Okay, so
what the hell is going on?
So what is the answer to why the Trump administration, given their views of China, doesn't?
I think that the first step, well, I'll just say my position is probably different from yours, but like, I'm not against Israel. I like Israel. I like going there. Like the Israelis, nice people. I'm not, don't seek any kind of argument. I'm not anti-Israel. But I think what America desperately lacks, and it's gotten to a point where it's dangerous for the country, is like an honest conversation about any of this stuff. And that's because certain ruthless actors, and it's coordinated online, like attack everyone as like call them really hurtful names that affect your personal relationships when you raise these questions. But like someone needs to be brave enough to just say, let's have a rational conversation about our national interest. I don't think it's harder than that.
But you know what the irony of it, the core irony of it is the conservative critique or grievance about the American left over the past 20 years has been the minute you try and have an honest conversation about any kind of policy, you instantly get smeared as a racist,
right,
a misogynist.
Because of identity politics.
I don't know.
And you may be suggesting that something like that's going on here.
It might be a little bit similar, that the minute you even suggest a question or even a peep of criticism about Israel, you instantly are branded an anti-Semite. It seems pretty similar to me to the tactics long used by the American left that the conservatives have been vocally complaining about for a long time.
That's, Glenn, I would love to shout you down and say that's unfair, but it's not. That is fair. It's true. What you're saying is true. But the point of calling you names was to continue doing things the way they'd always been done, because some people are benefiting from that.
Exactly.
It had nothing to do with race. Just as I don't think this argument has anything to necessarily to do with ethnicity or religion. It's just like what's best for America.
The protest movements on college campuses were, I don't want to say led by, because that's maybe an exaggeration, but in many cases is definitely true, but driven in large part by Jewish students vehemently opposed to the destruction of Gaza by Israel. So the idea that somehow it's anti-Semitic to question either the Israeli destruction of Gaza or the U.S. financing of it, when you have huge numbers of Jews on the streets every day marching in protest against it, by itself should reveal how corrupted that tactic is. And yet it's so effective because it's instantaneous, right? No one wants to be called a racist. No one wants to be called an anti-Semite.
No.
And it is an effective tactic. At least like it makes it so that you think like maybe it's just easier for me to keep my mouth shut about this and talk about something else.
Well, it's going to destroy the MAGA movement, which I think is really important. It's in a sense not just about Trump. Of course, I love Trump, but I feel like if there's one thing that could destroy this essential reform movement, it's like kind of our last chance to make government responsive to the people who own the government, which is the citizenry. This will destroy it.
Because the massive contradiction sitting at the heart
That's
of it.
what I'm
And
saying.
not just that, like, it's not all the stuff we talked about, but also free speech, free expression, not being punished for your views was also a vital part of this movement. I know that's why I found so much common ground with the American right and with the MAGA movement over the last 10 years, because of my vehement opposition to attempts to censor the internet or introduce laws to characterize certain views as hate speech and therefore punishable. And that's exactly what has been done. There's this attempt now to impose on colleges, require colleges to adopt, but also enact into American law, this radical expansion of what anti-Semitism means. Like, there's laws that say, here's what racism is, here's what, xenophobia is, here's what Islamophobia is, misogyny, whatever, to expand the definition of anti-Semitism to include statements not only about Jewish people who should be subjected to critique. Like, you should be able to say, that Ben Shapiro seems to care quite a lot about Israel, maybe even to the point that he cares about it more than the United States. Like, you should be able to express that critique. So this expanded definition prohibits not only statements like that, accusing any Jewish person of having greater loyalty. I can say, oh, that person's Irish. He seems to really care a lot about Ireland more than the United States. Or that person is Indian. He really seems to care a lot about India, maybe even more so. You're allowed to say all that. But the other thing is, you cannot say, this is just one example, you cannot say Israel is a racist endeavor. You can say Iran is a racist endeavor. You can say Hamas is a racist endeavor. You can say the United States is a racist endeavor. You can say anything you can be a student at a school a month away from completing your PhD with a completely clean record, and you can write an op-ed saying, I think America is a country of violence and imperialism and evil and was founded on racism, and you'll be totally fine. You write an op-ed, 1/10 of those criticisms, but about Israel, and ICE is coming to get you and to deport you. Why is that? Why is not just our free speech being limited, but being limited not even to protect our own society and our own government, but to protect a foreign government from critique? So this is the kind of thing that cannot be sustained by a movement that has certain values that it professes that are being radically assaulted by this one single policy and loyalty toward this other country.
I could not agree more.
The idea that we're going to permit the erosion of those for any reason is offensive to me, but to do so in defense of a foreign country on the other side of the world because they have so much influence in our politics, that is just so offensive to me. I don't care what impact it has on my career. I don't care what people say about me. Like, that is something I will never stop talking about.
I agree, and I think it's not sustainable because, as you said, the contradiction is just too obvious. And and last thing I'll say is, not that it's like a top concern of mine or whatever, but I don't think it's great for Israel actually at all. I just, like, long term, this is not the way to play.
Well, an Israeli politician, actually a general, just said Israel's on the way to becoming a pariah state.
Yeah, and you can't transfer American military technology to China. I just want to say that for the 5th time because I don't think most people know that that's happening, but it is.